Namandabts, 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 namandabts. Good morning, everybody. I wanted to thank you all for coming together for this service as a Sangha. First, I wanted to thank Jill Bowie for being our chairperson and Renee Maruyama for being our pianist today. And I also wanted to thank my wife, Linda, for getting me these wonderful 8 red apples, I think from Tokyo Central. And you know I love apples. I can't wait to get those home and eat them. And the other thing was I kind of panicked. I'm type A, and I was just positive those apples were too big to fit in the little shelves. But they fit perfect. So, and I also realized that maybe Linda was so smart that she picked apples because we're going to talk about the Beatles today. And, you know, they started Apple Records after Capitol Records. And I think sometimes they used green apples and sometimes they use red apples. I think Let It Be was a red apple. So we're going to talk about the Beatles today. And what I really wanted to talk about today, the theme is coming together. Our country is very fractured right now, and we're having trouble coming together. And one of the things I really admire about Japanese culture is when we have meetings, we really encourage diversity, and no opinion is off limits, and we want everyone to be heard. But then in a miraculous way, at the end of the meeting, we understand that we have to come to a conclusion. And usually we acquiesce, we meet in the middle, and we find something that's very positive moving forwards. And so I think that's a very important thing to do. And you have to learn this kind of togetherness in everything we do in life. How many people are in Scouts? Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, and in sports, right? Sayo basketball. I played football. It's a big sport with lots of different players, and you need lots of different kinds of people to field a football team. Also in school, you know, you have to work with your teacher and your other classmates, and a lot of times there's group projects. And then on today's theme, music. It's really important with music. Whether you're in a band or in a marching band, or you're playing with an accompanist, you're doing a duet, or maybe you're backing up a vocal, you really have to come together and kind of have a one mind and kind of put your ego and your wants and desires on the back burner. And the other thing, the pieces don't really have a lot of meaning until they're in the whole, right? Until things come together, we really don't have a lot of meaning. It's when we're able to combine things. In isolation, it's kind of fragmented, but together we make a cohesive whole. So when I was at work, we had seminars on being tolerant of one another. But there's another level above tolerance, and that is harmony. Tolerance is kind of like you're different from me, and I'm going to tolerate you. But harmony is where you appreciate the differences and you harmonize with the other person. Reverend Wonder did a talk a couple weeks ago called Harmonious Coexistence. So, you know, in tolerance we exist, but in harmony we coexist. And there's a sense of oneness. So I'm going to talk about harmony first. So harmony, musically speaking, or even in general, is the combination of simultaneously sounded musical notes to produce chords and chord progressions having a pleasing effect. And this happens a lot when you play guitar. When we listen to music, we pretty much only listen to the melody and the rhythm guitarist. But there's a lot of stuff going on in the background with the drums and the bass guitar. And I found out recently that a bass guitar is actually considered a percussion instrument. It usually has more in common with the drums than it does with the melody. So sometimes the bass guitar will play the melody, but usually it's playing something really obscure. And I played guitar, and when I played with others in a band, I got disoriented. Like, I could only play sitting down by myself. Because when the drums came in and the bass came in and people started singing, I got disoriented and I didn't know where I was. So I think it takes a real sense of musicality to be able to do that. So it means, in general, to be in harmony with others. So I think I told you guys, I only really know three things. I know the Beatles, I know math, and I know Buddhism. I don't know anything else. To me, that seems like a low number, 3, but a lot of Sangha members told me, no, that's good. 3's high. You should be very proud of yourself. So there was that documentary on Disney Plus called Get Back, and I tried to watch it as a huge Beatle fan, and it kind of broke my heart because they were bickering a lot, and they were merely tolerant of one another. And after the first episode, I stopped watching. I just couldn't watch them arguing and bickering with one another. I remember in one scene, George Harrison played All Things Must Pass to John and Paul, and they kind of went, I heard better. It was very sad. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the Beatles today. John Lennon, of course, played rhythm guitar and was a wonderful... John Lennon said he wasn't a great virtuoso on any instrument, but he had touch, and he could make any instrument sound good. So he said you could give him a tambourine or a tuba, and he could make it sound good, even though he wasn't a virtuoso. So he must have had a lot of feel in his music. And then Paul, the other McCartney and Lennon pair who wrote the songs, he played bass guitar. And they really didn't write very many songs together. It always says Lennon and McCartney, but they really didn't write together, but they would bounce ideas off one another and get feedback and kind of constructive criticism. And so in that way, they wrote together. And then George Harrison, I've been seeing on YouTube lately, he's considered to be the one, along with Ringo, that actually carried the band musically, that he is a virtuoso guitar player, and that all the great licks, all the great guitar you're hearing on any Beatles song is George Harrison. They also said he had the best voice ever to go from his head voice to his chest voice. He could drop without making a crack. And then Ringo is also considered to be a virtuoso drummer. So when these four came together, something magical happened. We tend to focus on Lennon and McCartney, but it's Ringo and George and this background bass that really gave them something special. It gave them a very special sound. So it's that thing where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. There's just something about their harmony and their connection with one another that really sounded unique. And they have not been able to reproduce it independently. So I wanted to play you some songs where you're only going to hear the bass and perhaps the drum, and then you have to guess what song it is. And I wanted to show you how the background is almost incoherent without the band. And the song doesn't have its juice without this background. And so together it makes something very special. So this is very hard to do, and I'm going to give you some hints, and you probably still won't get it right because it's very hard. But if it was really easy, it would ruin the Dharma talk, right? So this is from the Hey Jude album, and it's kind of a bunch of singles put together in an album for release in the United States. So listen to this bass line. Do you know what song it is? Anyone? Yes, it's Rain. So who got that one right? Wow, very good. Very good ear. Okay, very good. The next one is going to be from this album. Does anybody know this album? Sgt. Pepper. This was the first Beatle album I ever got. I was, I think, 10 years old. And it was too far ahead of me. I didn't really appreciate it. I didn't understand it. Okay, ready? Wow, you guys are great. So I got this album when I was 10, and I'm almost 64. So I don't know, that's kind of a little unnerving. Okay, this is another song from Sgt. Pepper. I think this one's, well, I don't know, you guys are doing really good, but this one's pretty hard. Okay, wrong album. You know how you guys pick on me with Marvel Comics and DC Comics? I got this. I'm not going to make any. I'm going to pick on you guys now. So I like this example. The reason why it's so hard is the bass line doesn't sound like anything meaningful at all until it's with the other members of the band. So it's when it's one that it has its power. When it's alone, it sounds, I don't know, Paul was like, why am I playing this? So, this is a good example of how, something seemingly insignificant when in harmony has a huge impact. And a lot of times when we're listening to music, we're consciously listening to the melody and the lyrics, but it's the bass and the drums that are actually moving us. I told you that story where a friend of mine went to an AC/DC concert at the Forum, and it was so loud, it hurt their ears. And so they left for a while, and they went out in the lobby, and they had to go to the restroom. And it was a female friend, and she went into the restroom and sat on the toilet, and she could feel the bass through the seat. So this is what the bass and the drums do. So like even you leave the concert and you go in the restroom, you can't get away from it. Now, I think these are getting easier. Now, I did these in chronological order, in the order that the albums were released, not when the albums were recorded. So keep that in mind. So this is Abbey Road. This comes from Abbey Road. And I think this is their best album, personally. You know this one, right? What'd you say? Come Together. And you know what that you know what that is? All cell phone owners won't know what that is, but I think that's an old style telephone where you go No, I'm serious. It's not a joke. So, he's calling someone. So, Ringo probably came up with that. He just threw that in. Okay, now we're going to get one from Let It Be. This is the last album released by the Beatles. You guys got to get this one. Get Back. Get Back. So I didn't know this, but I kind of thought the Beatles were in deep conflict because you have John Lennon saying, "Come Together," and on the very next album you have Paul McCartney saying, "Get Back." And I really thought, maybe they were sending each other messages in their music. They're just not in sync with one another. But in the Get Back documentary, I didn't know this. I've never heard this before, but it said Get Back was a song criticizing people who weren't being tolerant. It was mocking people that were saying, "Get back. Go back to Mexico. Go back to Venezuela. Go back to the Middle East. Go back to Asia. We don't want you here in England." There was a big nationalist, white supremacist movement in the late 60s and early 70s in Great Britain, and Paul was mocking that. But he had to do it in kind of a sneaky way, or it would have gotten maybe censored by the BBC. So this song is actually an anti-racist protest song, which I thought was very interesting. So here's a picture of that documentary on Disney Plus. You know, this picture is great because it looks like they're still a band and they're still working together. But like I said, we've got, you know, Come Together and Get Back. And there was a lot of arguing and bickering. The Let It Be movie is kind of hard to watch. The music was, it took forever to get produced and mixed and released. It was not, all four of them were not very happy after the Let It Be recording sessions for that Get Back movie. I think they all felt a little bit ashamed, and they had lost something. So what I thought was really interesting, it made me super happy, I'll show you this in a sec, the difference between being harmonious and being merely tolerant on the Let It Be recordings is the ability or willingness to tolerate something, in particular the existence of opinions or behavior that one does not necessarily agree with. So, you know, this is kind of, you're tolerant of it, but you're not embracing it and you're not learning from it. So it means to be tolerant of others. And I mean, it's a good start. It's a good starting point. If it wasn't for tolerance, we wouldn't have the Let It Be album. But when we had harmony, we were able to get the Abbey Road album. So musically, it was a lot better. So this is the part that gets a little bit confusing. Abbey Road was actually recorded before, Let It Be was recorded before Abbey Road, but it was released after because of all these production problems. So it says, released in September of 1969, Abbey Road was the final Beatles album to be recorded, but not their last to be released. Let It Be, though mainly recorded in January of 1969, was finally released in May of 1970 alongside the film of the same name. And so I was able to find this quote. I Googled about to make sure I had this right. So, you know, Abbey Road was released first, Let It Be last, but Let It Be was actually recorded before Abbey Road. So, you know, technically their last recording, their last album was Abbey Road, which is a huge statement about their powers and talent. And they were able to do it one last time. So it says, in the midst of the conflicts that would define their final days, the Beatles pulled it together for one last magnificent collaboration. It was the culmination of their 7-year partnership, 4 men who had grown up together and were now growing apart, collecting the fragments of their unfinished work and arranging them into a shining moment. So, like I said, this came out, and then that was recorded, and then this is actually their final recorded album. And so I always find this very hopeful, that they were able to move aside their differences and end on a very positive note. And, you know, John Lennon was assassinated in 1980, and George Harrison passed away, I think, in his early 50s from throat cancer and brain cancer. And so Ringo is still alive, of course, today. I just saw a picture of him on the internet with his new grandchild. And Paul is still alive. But I think all of us could really learn from this example that when we put away our differences and we move from tolerance to harmony, we can really come together and do something positive as a group. I think I read an article about Tennessee. There's a lot of people upset in Tennessee that there's too much change and too many things are changing. And that tends to make people want to not be harmonious. It's hard to be tolerant when change is coming at you too quickly. And you tend to fall back into your own tribe and your own groups. But I think this is where Buddhism could really help modern culture. This idea that change is inevitable, it's something natural, it's something very positive, and it should be embraced. And so I think Buddhism is an antidote to that anxiety we feel that things are changing too quickly. And I have read that things have always changed over time, but in the modern era, things are changing faster and faster and faster. The rate of change is speeding up. You just think about, just in my lifetime, I had a mobile phone. Lynn and I were watching The Crown, and we can kind of tell what decade it is by their mobile phones, right? They have these giant mobile phones, and then they have the flip phone, and then they have the iPhone. And remember, the iPod wasn't even a phone, right? It just played music. Things are happening so quickly and so fast that it's causing people to pull in and go to their corners and to want things to remain the same and to be organized. And I think Buddhism could really help us as an antidote to that fear, that innate nervousness or anxiety we feel when change happens a little bit too quickly. And so being open, listening to one another, valuing diversity is very important. I actually got $2 in the mail from the Pew Research Center to fill out a online survey on diversity. I kept the $2. I didn't fill out the form. And then we got it in the mail. Now I feel really guilty. I got it in the mail. They probably think I don't know how to use a computer. So they sent me a booklet where you color it in, like voting by mail. And one of the questions was, do you believe that diversity is positive, that change is good, that differences make us better than? Do you think that's true, yes or no? And so even the Pew Research Group is looking into this problem of people not being able to embrace change, not be able to flow with life, wanting to be the way things were maybe a long time ago. There's kind of a romantic idea that in the 50s, everything was great, nobody got divorced, everybody was white, it was the good old days, and that's kind of a romantic fantasy. I talked to my mom. She said, no, it wasn't like that. And a lot of people talk that way, like the good old days. And maybe the good old days are ahead of us if we could just coexist harmoniously with one another. So I figure if the Beatles could come back from Let It Be and record Abbey Road, anything is possible for us and as a people and as a nation. So thank you very much. Please join me in Dasho. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Thank you very much.